Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mrs. Chambers. We had dealt with calls in January and the early part of February. We'd finished on the 13th of February. Can we turn to another Wednesday for Mr. Castleton? Wednesday, the 25th of February 2004. It's Fujitsu 0012 2322. And to page 8, please. And so this is this right, a power help call record for the page 8. Thank you. A power help call record for the 25th of February 2004.
Yes.
We can see it was open for half an hour.
Yes.
And we can see that this time the caller was Christine,
Yeah.
who I think was one of the clerks or a clerk at Mr. Castleton's branch. We can see the problem stated under problem text. Clerk reports they've been having problems on the system when balancing that seems to be related to stock remmed in through the week. And then if we scroll down, please, to call activity log. New call taken by Mary Rainbow. So we're back with Mary Rainbow again. Clerk reports they've been having problems on the system when balancing that seems to be related to stock remmed in through the week. Clerk reports that over the past 7 weeks they've had losses every week. At one point they had a problem with cash on hand, but they was found to be a issue with ID numbers and has been resolved.
Yes.
Clerk reports that last week when they rolled over, they put a loss into suspense account and then took the unit back to trial balance and came out with a zero net discrepancy to start the new CAP, is that cash accounting period,
Yes.
with. Clerk reports that she printed a balance snapshot on Monday and all looked okay, but since then they've remmed in some stock which appears to have given them a loss. Advise the clerk she will need to check her stock position for last week and then check her rems in summary. This will give her the stock she should be holding. This figure can then be compared with the stock showing in adjust stock, and this will highlight any problems with stock on hand. Clerk reports they were told that checks would be made on the system, but she's unsure if this information came from MBSC or HSH, as she has no names or reference numbers. Advise the clerk that we need her to take the unit to trial balance this evening and come back before she rolls over, so we can take down any details she can give us. Clerk reports they usually perform the balance at about 5:30 p.m. or maybe before. Spoke to Matt Saunders and he suggests call should be passed to someone line Heather Dryden, that's presumably someone like Heather Dryden, if clerk does call back wanting further assistance. The clerk reports they're working in a shared AA stock unit. Clerk to call back tonight if further assistance required. Clerk to call back if further assistance required. Call reference taken. Call closed. Clerk reports problems with the balance that appear to be linked to stock remmed in. Clerk will, over the page, call back tonight if further assistance required. Can we then look to later that day, please, at page 10? And so later on the 25th, we're now at 12:03 p.m. on the same date. And I think this is the MBSC calling the HSH. Is that right?
It looks like it, yes.
And looking at the call activity log, new call taken by Robert Congerton, MBSC. Postmaster has called the embassy regarding problems with her balance. Postmaster called in at 11:03 today regarding problems with her balance. Advised the MBSC that the agent advised the postmaster to call back in tonight when they have a net discrepancy on the cash account. Call closed. Yes?
Yes.
And so then can we turn to page 14, please? This is still the same day when the call is opened, Wednesday the 25th of February at 5:33 p.m. Again, can we read the call activity? New call taken by Kuljinder Bakchu. Postmaster reporting they're getting large discrepancies for the last few weeks. Looking at closed calls for this site, there have been a number of calls logged regarding discrepancies. MBSC have been in contact with the postmaster and cannot find any user error. Just stopping there, do you know what NBSC used to do in order to determine whether or not a discrepancy reported had as its cause user error?
As I said earlier, getting the postmaster to check the transaction logs against any other records that he had in the post office.
Spoke to Sandra at NBSC regarding this issue, checked Tivoli events and health checked. Site is health checking okay. Can you help us with what a health check was?
The comms were all working okay, and no sign of any comms problems.
A critical event seen on the 18th of February 2004, and a KEL reference is given. I'm going to ignore the rest of it until we pick up at 1809. Spoke to postmaster, who advises that the problem with the cash account started ever since the BT engineer came to move the BT box for the preparation of ADSL, as it's called. Username and other balance users balance on Wednesday after 5:30. And then this, could SSC please investigate why this post office is experiencing large discrepancies ever since BT engineer has moved box in preparation for ADSL installation. KEL reference given as possible problem. You're later taking matters shortly to say that KEL reference was to do with something else completely, is that right?
Yes, as I recall, yeah.
MBSC have said there is no user error. Thank you. Is this therefore the event which generates the pinnacle which triggers your involvement?
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're not talking about a system event. You're talking about the call being passed over to SSC. Yes.
Yeah. So that the request for SSC involvement we see at 1814. Could SSC please investigate why this post office is experiencing large discrepancies ever since the BT engineer has moved the BT box?
Yes.
Is that the task that you subsequently undertook, investigating all of the discrepancies that had been reported since the BT engineer had moved the BT box?
I can't remember what the date was when the BT engineer did move the box.
It's described here as 7 weeks ago.
Okay. I
don't think you did conduct such a broad investigation.
I concentrated mostly on the last couple of weeks, which was when I had most of the evidence for.
Given that this was the request, could SSC please investigate why this post office is experiencing large discrepancies ever since the BT engineer had moved the box? Why did you look only at the last couple of weeks? Because that was the data that was most readily available, and I think I assumed that if there was a problem, an ongoing problem, then I would find evidence of it most easily in the most recent weeks. What about if there was more than one problem? A problem or problems in the earlier weeks different from any problem in the later weeks?
Yes, it's possible then if there was a problem in a different problem in the earlier weeks that my investigations might not have found it. I obviously, even 18 months beyond this, I couldn't remember precisely what my investigation was. I knew I had very thoroughly investigated a week or two.
And my question is, why did you investigate only a week or two?
As I said, because I felt that if there was an ongoing underlying cause, then I would find that most readily in the most recent week.
Would you not take this as your terms of reference or your instruction, the request that essentially dates back to when the first problem was reported back on the 14th of January 2004?
I don't think I would necessarily have done this. I was just doing a general investigation to see if I could find the cause for the discrepancies.
But only the recent discrepancies?
That was my starting point, yes.
Well, it was your ending point too, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, given that I now cannot remember precisely what I did over which stage. But yes, if there'd been, I probably did not investigate thoroughly back towards the beginning of January.
Can we turn, please, to the Pinnacle, please, which is essentially your originating document.
Yes.
Would that be fair?
Yes.
And that's FUJ 0014 6165. In fact, it's a peak, not a pinnacle. We can see the peak number PC 009954. And we can see that it was opened on the day that we've just referred to, the 25th of February 2004, at 6:19 p.m. Can you see that?
Yes.
And I think if we look at page 2, we can see that it was assigned to you at 9:41. Can you see that just below halfway down?
Yes.
And that's the following day,
Yes.
the 26th of February,
Yeah.
at 9:41.
Yes.
And does that mean that you get it then, or does it just mean that it has been assigned and you don't receive anything until you log onto a system?
When I next looked at my Pinnacle stack, I would have seen it, but I don't know. That wasn't necessarily at 9:41.
I think we can see that you had looked at your stack by at least 10:17 because you make an entry at 10:17 right at the foot of the page.
Yes.
When you change the description in the call summary
Yes.
box, and I think others may ask you about that. And so this is the first record we see of you doing any work on this event, yes?
Yes.
Can we go back to page 1, please? What on this page do you see when you open up this peak?
Just that they're reporting large discrepancies. It says there have been a number of calls logged.
Just stopping there, it says postmaster reporting they're getting large discrepancies for the last few weeks. That's not really accurate, is it? On the basis of what we've seen.
Is that not accurate?
Didn't it go back to the 14th of January?
Well, I'd have said that the last few weeks from the 25th of February probably does just about include the 14th of January.
Was that phrase, last few weeks, what conditioned your investigation to only look at data for a week or two?
I don't think so. I think I then did look at the closed calls, and so then I did get the picture, and I could see that, yes, they had been reporting problems since, was it the 14th of January when they had the £1,100 loss?
And where would you have seen that they had been reporting calls since the 14th of January from?
Was that not on the Power Help calls?
Can you look, please, at Fujitsu 0012 2322? The first Power Help call is on the 28th of January,
Yeah.
and it's only in the MBSC call log that one sees the records for the 14th and the 21st of January.
But this says...
And-
sorry.
I'm so sorry. You'll see in the problem text that it's recorded that it's been the case for 3 weeks in a row.
Yes.
Are you saying that you read this and realised that the 28th wasn't the first report? It had been going on for 3 weeks beforehand?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I read that now, and that's what I read, and I think I would have seen that at the time.
Yes, and so why wouldn't you investigate the 3 weeks beforehand?
Because the message store data would not have gone back to the 14th of January.
How far back would it have gone when you were looking on the 26th of February?
I'm hesitating because...
We've heard different dates in the inquiry, so I'm not going to suggest
Yeah.
how long the message store was retained for.
At one point, messages were kept for 42 days, and then that was reduced, and they were then kept for only around 35 days, I think it was. But I can't remember when that change came in.
We've heard both of those dates, thank you. And so was it that you thought that if there was a system problem, it would be disclosed by investigating recent weeks, that you limited your investigation to recent weeks? Or was it because the data wasn't available on the message store?
I think primarily it was because I thought, if there was an ongoing problem, I would find the evidence for it in the recent weeks, and that was the obvious place to start looking.
Can we go back, please, to Fujitsu 0014 6165? Which is the peak.
Yes.
And so you can see all of this data on the first page, i.e. every entry that's made before you look at 10:17 the following day.
Yes.
And would your practice have been to read what's here? Or are there certain bits you know to go to without reading it line by line?
I certainly would have glanced over it. I would probably have gone back and looked at all the Power Help calls as well, in case there was more information on those that for some reason wasn't on the peak. Certainly the peak would only contain the information from the latest, the Power Help call on which this was based. But I would have gone and looked at everything on Power Help.
Do you see anything else automatically, whether by sort of hyperlink or other electronic connection, when you open up the peak, or do you have to go and find it yourself?
I have to go and find it myself.
And I think you tell us that, first off, you looked for other peaks or pinnacles, and you tell us in paragraph 29 of your statement that there were none.
Yes.
And that, would you agree, would be because none had been raised, because Mr. Castleton had been passed backwards and forwards between MBSC and HSH a number of times, and nobody had referred the matter to the SSE.
Yes, but I wasn't looking for other peaks purely because of that. I'd have seen that from the Power Help calls anyway. I was also looking in case there were any reconciliation calls or system event type calls for which peaks have been raised, which I might not have found so readily on Power Help.
And how would you search pinnacles or peaks? By reference to the FAD code?
The FAD code, yes.
So you're looking whether there's anything branch specific?
Yeah.
You tell us in your witness statement, there's no need to turn it up, it's paragraph 30, that you checked whether the branch appeared in any reconciliation reports.
Yes.
Can you explain what reconciliation reports are, please?
There was a whole suite of checks that were made comparing, for example, totals from the counters for the transactions each day with the totals that had reached the data centre to make sure nothing had got lost being moved from when it was replicated from one to the other. There was a large suite of checks. Also, the cash account was recalculated at the data centre based on the copy of the transactions there and compared with the cash account that had actually been produced at the branch. So this was just checking the integrity of the data, if you like.
For what period did you check the reconciliation reports?
I believe those reports were only kept for 2 weeks. That's what I said, I think, back in 2006, when I probably knew. And so I just would have checked all the reports as far back as they existed.
Can we look, please, at LCAS 40112? This is your witness statement in the proceedings. As you say, it's dated the 14th of September 2006. And can we look at the second page? And look at paragraph 7 at the bottom. You say, on the 26th of February, I also checked for any central reconciliation report entries for the branch for the past 2 weeks, which might indicate a system problem. So that's the 2-week period.
Yeah.
You don't say they were the only ones that are available to me.
No, I didn't say that then.
Were they the only ones available to you, or did you frame the request, namely only to look back a couple of weeks?
No, I mean, the way I checked was just to look for all occurrences of the FAD code in any files in the folder that held the reconciliation reports. So I checked everything that was available at that time.
Were those reports automatically generated by the system?
Yes.
That can come down, thank you. Which part of the system were they automatically generated by?
There was part of the overnight processing at the data centre produced compared the sets of figures that it received from various sources.
Did they rely on riposte as part of the process for the compilation?
Only in so much as the data that was aggregated for the totals to be compared had to be I mean, riposte was the mechanism which read the message store. So, sorry, I'm trying to think about this. So yes, on the counters, the figures that we use for comparison, there must have been some sort of riposte query saying, add up this data out of the message store. And then I presume at the data center it was also using riposte to access the data center, to access the messages for the branch.
If there were errors or discrepancies in the compilation of these reports, would you have any means of checking that that was so?
I mean, I think if there were errors on one side or the other, then we would be seeing a lot of, you'd get a lot more entries on the reconciliation reports, because it seems pretty unlikely that you would get the same riposte error happening on a counter and at the data center at the same time. If you had it happen, an error on one side but not on the other, then the figures wouldn't match, and you'll get an entry on the reconciliation reports to be investigated. And I think very occasionally there were entries that were due to some sort of inconsistency in calculation rather than anything else, but they were all investigated, as were any reconciliation report entries.
You tell us in your witness statement, thank you, that, and this is paragraph 28 on page 9, no need to turn it up, you looked at the HSH raised calls for the branch on the Power Help system, as you've described.
Yes.
And we've seen those already. They go back to the 28th of January, and the MBSC call log goes back further than that.
Yes.
But there's a reference on that first page to 3 weeks the problem has been occurring for.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
With the amounts written down
Yes.
on each of those 3 weeks.
Yes.
I don't think you investigated those historic balancing discrepancies, did you?
At that point, no, I probably didn't.
In paragraph 34 of your witness statement, I wonder whether we could turn that up, please. WITN 0017 0200. Page 11, please. Paragraph 34. Which is at the foot of the page. You say, as well as examining the message store using a text file viewer, I probably extracted all the transaction messages into a spreadsheet so they could be more easily examined. I certainly did this for the cash lines product one. I can't remember whether it was for a week or longer, nor which weeks I checked.
Yes.
Now, of course, when you were doing this, you didn't realise that you would be called to give evidence about what you had done.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
And so you didn't keep a record of the work that you had undertaken?
No,
At the end of the process, you summarised it in an entry in the Peak.
yes, I would have kept the spreadsheet and the message store in my own file store for some time afterwards, but I didn't still have it in 2006.
To when it came 18 months later to make the witness statement. In fact, it's longer than 18 months later. It's 2.5 years later. You didn't have your workings out available to you?
No.
If you'd known that you were going to be a witness, whether a witness of fact or an expert witness, would you have kept them?
Yes, I would have done. I could have attached them to the Peak, which would have been a safe place to keep them, but we tended only to put data on Peak for calls that were then going to be passed on to development or whatever.
Again, you say that you can't remember whether you did this, extracting messages into the spreadsheet from the message store for a week or longer. Why wouldn't it be for all of the period, given that the concerns had been raised a month and a half previously?
Yes. It might have been. I can't remember. I know I didn't want to say that I had done more than I had done when I couldn't truly remember what I'd done or not. I know I absolutely certainly did it for a week. It could well have been longer than a week, but I can't remember.
If you had got a problem revealed on the Peak to be of 7 weeks duration, wouldn't the natural thing be to do, if the data was available, to examine the available data for that 7-week period?
Yes, it would seem to be so, and I may have done it, but I cannot swear that I did do it.
And again, the 2 weeks of reconciliation reports you looked at, that was a limiting factor only because they were the only reconciliation reports available.
I checked all the reconciliation reports that were available, yes.
That 2 week period wasn't the governing period for the entirety of your investigation.
No.
How much time did you take undertaking the investigation?
Well, I'm aware I closed it before the end of that day, so it was a few hours' work.
If we look at the at Fujitsu 0014 6165, and second page, please. And if we scroll down to 1017, we can see your entry at 1017. So you're certainly aware of this entry, aware of this peak by the time of that entry.
Yes.
And if we look at the bottom of the page, please, we can see your entry of 3:16 p.m. that day.
Yes.
Which is your last entry, essentially.
Yes.
Would you have spent the 5 or so hours between those two times only on this? Or would you have been looking at other peaks and other issues too?
I was probably only looking at this.
So you said a couple of hours earlier. It looks like it's about 5 hours.
Yeah. Yes.
Can we turn, please, to your witness statement, please? WITN 0017 0200. And look at page 4, please. And paragraph 13. You say here a call, this is not one we've looked at, call, and you give the number, was not obviously relevant to discrepancies. It was logged when Mr. Castleton found the message desktop initialization failed on the counter 2 screen on the Monday morning, attempts to clear the problem by rebooting and by deleting the training message store were not successful. So an engineer was sent to replace the base unit with a new one. As part of the standard base unit replacement process, a zipped copy of the previous night's message store was copied from counter 1 to the new counter 2. Then all subsequent messages were replicated across. This was completed at around 2:20 p.m. and then LCA 001 was able to log on to counter 2. It was not possible to carry out transactions on counter 2 before then, those see below. This issue you're talking about here, the installation of the new base unit, was this part of your investigation at the time, i.e. on the 26th of February 2004?
I don't recall that I did look closely at this at that time.
And so this is something that you're telling us now, by looking at
Yes.
documents now,
Yes,
rather than something that you did back in 2004?
Yes, I looked at it, of course, in 2006, and I've looked at it again now.
These messages that you're talking about here are dated the 1st and 2nd of February 2004. Wouldn't you have looked back at those, or was the reason that you didn't look back at those at the time was that they were outside the date range that you were looking at?
No, I think it was because it wasn't relevant to discrepancies, rather than that it was outside the date range.
So you would have looked at them and seen that that there was this issue about the installation of a new base unit.
Yes, sorry, when you say them, what do you mean?
Messages from Mr. Castleton about the installation of a new base unit.
Right, no, that was a message that was displayed on his computer screen that he saw. And so that was when he logged a call about it with the help desk, he said that was what he reported was showing on the screen.
And so why were you, when you looked at these messages, content that they could have had no impact on discrepancies?
Well,
when Mr. Castleton was saying it's since the installation of this new base unit that the problem has occurred.
I'm not sure he was saying it was from the installation of the BT box. That message that he saw on the screen meant that the computer was not working at all, which is why it had to be replaced. If it's not working, you can't be doing transactions on it. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure where we're trying to go.
If we carry on in your witness statement, please, at 14, you say, looking at the event messages, there are none written on counter 2 between the 1st of February and 2:24 p.m. on the 2nd of February. All counters at the branch regularly exchanged handshake messages to check they are all up and running. Counter 1 realised it couldn't communicate with counter 2, and so wrote an event, displayed a message to the user that it was disconnected from the network. I think the message it was disconnected is slightly confusing. The network was okay, and counter 1 was in communication with the data centre and could do online banking transactions, but counter 2 was effectively dead. What do you mean by the messages produced by, I think, Riposte were slightly confusing?
Because I put this section in because I was questioned about it in 2006, and it was obviously an area of concern to Mr. Castleton, and because I hadn't really covered this in my 2004 investigation, I thought it was worth trying to spell out here what I can now see. So to go back a bit, there was an event that was included in the ARQ event data that said node 1 is completely disconnected from the network. And I think Mr. Castleton asked me questions about this in 2006. But in fact, yes, this message was being produced on counter 1 because it couldn't communicate with counter 2, and that was because counter 2 had failed and was being replaced.
Can we look, please, at EXPG 601? And turn to page 174, please. You can see this is just extracted into an expert report that the inquiry has received. A KEL. Can you see it was raised back in 1999 and updated in 2004?
Yes.
And the symptoms are riposte error demodify operation failed. Is that IO or LO?
IO.
What is the IO completion wait operation?
I assume IO is input output, but this isn't something I have any memory or knowledge of.
And then some code is given. Error occurred within the cache machine. The IO completion wait time operation timed out. The message server will be shut down abnormally. And then solution, reboot counter. If message appears, then send engineer. If a single counter outlet engineer is to replace the mirror disk first, and if the message reappears, then to replicate the base unit. The base unit is replaced. Contact the SMC to synchronize the message store. See another KEL for further details. On a multi-counter outlet, replace the base unit.
Yes.
Is this KEL essentially explaining that after hardware replacement, engineers need to make sure that they synchronize machines so that transactions are not lost?
That's a single counter office.
I'm sorry.
It's yes. So it's hard to read because you haven't got it formatted. It's not formatted very well. But it's if a single counter office, which is SCO, the engineer must contact the SMC to synchronise the message stores. So the synchronisation is vital if replacing the base unit at a single counter office.
And do you recall discussing this issue in the run-up to Mr. Castleton's trial?
No, I don't, and he had a multi-counter outlet anyway.
Let's look at what was discussed then.
I mean, this precise error isn't the error that he was getting anyway. So.
I see. So this is a different...
This is a different... The probable disk problems is the underlying problem, but it was for a very specific riposte error, which was not seen at Marine Drive.
Got it. Let's look at the discussion that did take place before the trial then. Poll 307 1165. Can you see, this is an attendance note of a meeting at which you and a number of other Fujitsu and post office witnesses were all present. Can you see that?
Yes.
Dated the 6th of June 2006.
Yes.
Some solicitors from Bond Pierce, a solicitor from Hugh James, Brian Pinder Petersall, Andy, I think that's Dunks.
Yes.
DUNKS rather than Dunce.
Yes.
Anne Chambers, Naomi Ellis, Gareth Jenkins, a distinguished engineer of Fujitsu.
Yes.
Gareth Ward of the Post Office. Yes?
Yes, it was actually Naomi Elliott who was my manager's manager.
And can we turn to page 6, please? And can we look at the third main paragraph down? Approximately 3:30 a.m. the PCs do a refresh, and occasionally you get glitches in the system. This sometimes causes an initialization failure. An operational integrity violation points to a refresh not starting up properly. An engineer was sent out to sort the base unit and node. It's worth noting that all messages will be copied from the other node, potentially could lose some information if the two PC nodes were not communicating at the point of breakdown. There's nothing to suggest there was a problem at the end of the previous day. This can be checked by looking at the end of day marker to the 1st of February. And then AC, I think in that context that must mean you.
Must.
AC stated that if it is a problem, can forensically check the old hard drive, but you would need the postmaster to be aware of transactions having been lost. If this had occurred, would it be shown on standard filtered ARQ data?
If the transactions were lost, then they wouldn't have got anywhere to be audited.
And so if the postmaster was not aware at the time and the synchronization didn't work, the transactions could be permanently lost.
Possibly, yes, but you can tell from the ARQ data whether the synchronization was working. You can certainly tell from the underlying audited messages whether synchronization was working.
What about from the standard filtered ARQ data?
You could certainly see whether somebody had logged out, for example, at the end of the previous day, which would sort of imply a clear close down. But sorry, I'm just trying to remember. I think it would be hard to tell 100% from the ARQ data whether this had happened or not.
Were, at this time, the hard drives in the post office estate known to be subject of high failure rates?
I'm not sure about high failure rates, but yes, there certainly were problems.
Was it regarded as a significant issue?
I don't know if it was or not.
Was it talked about within the SSC, the number of hard drive failure rates?
Not that I recall.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I was just going to say there were also times when base units were replaced when in fact it might have been possible to sort out the problem in some other way, but it was actually the quickest way to get if for some reason a counter was unable to restart and run riposte, it was actually quicker to get them up and running again by sending an engineer out to exchange the base unit rather than by digging down as much as you could potentially have done into precisely what the problem was.
Thank you, Mrs. Chambers. Sir, we're finishing at 4 p.m. today. Might that be time for the afternoon break until 3:10?
Yes, that's fine, Mr. Beer. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Chambers, in your statement, you deal with the question of what would happen if Mr. Castleton was logged on to Node 1 at the branch during the time that Node 2 was out of action, and then Node 2 came back into action. He logged on to Node 2 without logging off Node 1.
Yes.
First of all, can you explain in simple terms what a node is?
A serving position, a counter, a separate two separate computers.
And so he's initially logged on to node 1
Yeah.
at a time that node 2, the other counter's out of action.
Yes,
Node 2 comes back online.
yes,
He logs on to that node 2,
yes,
but without logging off from node 1.
yes,
And you say, cutting through things, the result is that any transactions that he had done on node 1 would travel with him for completion onto node 2.
any transactions that hadn't been settled on node 1 would be moved over to node 2.
Can we look, please, at LCAS 0001 300? And can we look at page 337 in the bundle, please? If you can go back a page, I think that was it. Yes, I think that's 337 at the top there. Can that be expanded, please? Thank you. On this page, can you, in broad terms, without doing it column by column, explain what is shown by this document and where the data comes from?
Right, this appears to be part of an ARQ extract, what's I think usually called the transaction log.
And so just stopping there, this shows transactions, does it?
This shows transactions.
As opposed to events?
Yes.
Okay. And just in broad terms, tell us what the difference between a transaction and an event is.
A transaction has a financial value and will subsequently be included in the branch accounts. An event is various things showing users logging on, off.
Printing.
AP and reports being printed.
And you said that this is our ARQ data represented on this page. Is this, or could this be described as raw ARQ data, or has something been done to get it into this format?
The underlying data, and I don't know precisely what ARQ means, but the underlying archived messages are the raw messages as written on the counter, which get replicated to the data center and then get funneled off into files for audit.
How is that, I'll call that raw data, translated into a spreadsheet such as this?
An extract would be run against that raw data, pulling out all transactions in this case, where you've got, I've forgotten what the extract did, but it pulls out all lines where you've got a product number and various other attributes.
And is that pulling out? Can that be described as parsing?
I think parsing is more the sense where you've found the records that you like, but then out of those records you pull out various pieces of information, for example, user, session ID. So the parsing is the breaking up of a message and just pulling out certain pieces of information from that message.
And those two parts of the extraction and presentation, respectively, were they done by software that had been written in the SSC?
No. The access to the audited data could only be done by the security team, and they took total responsibility for that, and the SSC weren't allowed anywhere near the audit data.
And so the security team had to get the data, the raw data, as I'm calling it, From where?
There were very big files that were accumulated day after day after day, and then they had tools which SSC did not support, which enabled them to extract the data for the particular branch, for a particular date range, and then to format it in this way and to split it into event data and transaction data.
When it came to you, was it already in this type of format?
I didn't normally look at data in this format at all. We didn't use this data, except I think the first time probably I ever saw data in this format was for Marine Drive.
Was for this case?
Yes, in 2006.
So this first page then is looking at transactions extracted from ARQ data.
Yes.
And then if we skip over 2 pages at 339, and just if that can be expanded a little bit so you can see, is that showing the events data?
That's the events data, yes.
Thank you.
And there would also have been messages that didn't fall into either of those categories.
Thank you. Looking at 339 first, please. I can't quite see what's happened on the screen there. Thank you. Can we find the line which is 12:41 and 50 seconds? Can you see that? It's almost exactly halfway down the page.
Sorry, yes, I can see it.
I wonder whether that can be highlighted, 12:41 and 50 seconds. It's now about 8 lines in. (12:41 and 50 seconds. Just the one below that. Thank you. Does that show that at 12:41 p.m. and 50 seconds, the user LCA 001 logged on to node 1?
Yes, it does.
And can we see the node in the second column from the left?
That's the node, yes, on which the message was written, and that must have been the node to which he logged on.
On the same page, can we see at 2:24 and 58 seconds, thank you, node 2 was up and running, and LCA 001 logged onto that?
Yes.
Can we go back, please, to page 337? And scroll down, please. Can we see between 14:21:12 and 14:22:14, before LCA 001 had logged on to node 2, those credentials appear against a series of, I think, 14 pension transactions?
Yes.
If we just track those 14:21:12 right down to 14:22:14, so about 14 columns on, 14:22:14. And one more. Thank you very much. And so before node 2 was up and running again at 2:24 p.m, it's shown on these transactions on node 2 as appearing against 14 transactions that are carried out in, I think, a period of about 1 minute and 2 seconds. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you see in column F, in the session ID,
Yes.
there is a series of numbers with -1 after them.
Yes.
Do you understand from that 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 is the transactions travelling from node 1?
I wouldn't have put, well, yes, it's the transactions were carried out on node 1. That's why the session ID, which is the same for that complete set, has got 1 in the third position of it after the branch code. So they were carried out on node 1, but then finally at 1422, 14, the session, no, where's the settlements? Further down somewhere, isn't it, I believe? Yes, we haven't got a settlement in there at all. The confusing thing about looking at the data in this format is that the time is the time that the transaction was started, which isn't necessarily the time at which the session was settled.
If the transactions were made here with LCA 001's login, how could that happen before LCA 001 had logged in to node 2?
Because they were done on counter 1, which is why the session ID and the transaction IDs all have 1 in the third part of them. They were carried out on counter 1, but they were not settled before he logged on to counter 2. So when he logged on to counter 2, those transactions, because they were still just on the stack and hadn't been written to message store, so they were transferred across to the second counter. I think this is all explained very clearly in John Simpkins' witness statement.
I'm asking you for your view at the moment.
Okay.
We'll get to Mr.
Yeah.
Simpkins, I think, after Christmas.
Yes, my view when looking at this was that, yes, they were done on counter 1, but because they weren't settled before Mr. Castleton logged on to node 2, they were carried across to node 2. And somewhere further down, we'll have a transaction with the same session ID, which is the settlement for that session.
Can we just scroll down, please, and see whether we can find that?
It's that one at 142817.
So 4 down from the top of the page.
I've lost.
And can you explain the... thank you. Can you explain what that shows?
That shows that at 142817 on counter 2, the session that had been started on counter 1 with the session ID 188899855 was settled on counter 2 to cash for £1,350.75.
Thank you. And that can come down. It's right, isn't it, that each week the sub-postmaster would carry forward cash in hand and the stock in hand, so that one set of figures from, say, week 1 would feed into the figures for week 2?
Yes.
Can we please look at LCAS 40362? And page 29, please. Forgive me a moment whilst I catch up in my hard copy papers. Is this the cash account for week 41?
It appears to be, yes.
We can see that in the top right-hand corner.
Yeah,
In respect of Marine Drive,
yes.
Bridlington. And can we see that that week ended the 7th of January 2004?
Yeah. The
Can
cash
we go
account.
to page 30, please? So, no, if we just go back. I was taking the date from underneath cash account final. Week ended underneath it.
That's the end of the accounting period, but this report wasn't actually printed and produced until
To the 8th.
till the 8th in the morning.
So I wonder whether that could be highlighted underneath the words cash account final, the words week ended 7th of January 2004. Thank you. Can we go to page 30, please? And scroll down. Can you see the section of the cash account dealing with cash and stock in hand?
Yes,
And can you see that the cash in hand is £43,757.92?
yes,
And can you see that the stamps in hand are £5,335.11?
yes,
And so those figures ought to be the same when we look at the transaction data in Horizon, yes? In the ARQ data.
there wouldn't be, that wouldn't be held as transaction data in Horizon.
It will be held as,
Opening figures which aren't included in the ARQ extract.
would they appear as declare cash or declare stamps before the cash report account?
You would expect to see those figures or things that added up to those figures in the event data, yes.
In the event data, thank you very much. Can we try and look for that then, please? Remembering those figures, 43,757 and 5,335, yes?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at LCAS 30224? I wonder if that can be expanded so we can see a little more of it, please. Thank you. Can you help us as to what this data is, what these data are?
This is an extract from the ARQ event data. It looks like it might not be all the...
I missed the end of that sentence.
It's some lines, I think, from ARQ event data. It's not a complete set of ARQ event data. It's a subset.
If we look for the 8th of January, so if we scroll down, please. And for the 8th of January 2004, can we see the declare cash figure at 7:01 a.m. and 52 seconds?
Yes.
And the declare cash figure is £43,757.92.
Yes.
The same figure.
I didn't write down the figure that we were looking at before.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the same figure. Yes.
Okay.
That appears twice. Declare cash total twice. Can you see that?
I can, yes.
It doesn't matter for present purposes why that is. And then a little while later at 7:49 a.m. and 24 seconds, it says report cash account, report printed. Yes?
Yes, sorry, I'm rather puzzled by that data being not in date order, but never mind.
Are you not in chronological
Not
time
in
order?
time order. The ONCH total above is obviously from later that day, so this data has been manipulated in some ways. Sorry, I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm just pointing it out. But yes.
So these should be in chronological time order?
They would have been when, I would have thought they would have been when extracted for the ARC event data. But yes, so you've got a cash account at 7:49.
And so would that have been the printing of the document that we just looked at?
I assume so, yes.
So all okay so far?
Yes.
Can we look then at the declare stamp total figures at on the 7th of January at 17:06 and 17:41? If we just scroll up a little, no, that's it, we've got it. 17:06.
Yeah. And then,
Can you see declare stamp total 118322?
yes, I can. Again, they're not in date orders.
And then there's
in time order.
there's a previous one,
Yeah.
35 minutes later, printed before,
Yes.
namely 7:41 and 30 seconds, declare stamp total 0.
Yeah.
There aren't any other declare stamp total figures on this page, are there? Before the report cash account entries the following morning.
Doesn't look like it, no.
Those two figures, 118302 and then 0 at 17:06 and 17:41, neither of those match the £5,335.11 figure for stamps in hand as it appears in the final cash account, do they?
They don't appear to, no. Could we just go up slightly further to the previous cash account? If
Yes.
There. Yes. No, I was just... from this data, no, I cannot explain that. One thing is that you could make stamp and cash declarations with different declaration IDs, and then they got added together. So the 0 wouldn't necessarily wipe out the 1183.22, but I don't know why what is on that cash account
Is £5,335.11 for stamps.
unless there was another declaration using a different ID again since the previous cash account, but I can't.
It's not
see
shown
that
on here, is
It's
it?
not showing on there, no.
So the value of stamps had somehow reduced either to 0 or £1,183.02
Yes, I can't explain that looking at this.
on these ARQ data, and that has not been translated into the cash account for week 41, has it?
That appears to be something that at the moment I cannot explain and could be an error.
That would have disrupted the figures for week 42 as well, wouldn't it?
That might have given them a loss in week 41, but it shouldn't have then had any, I wouldn't have thought it should have had any knock-on effect, but without looking at the data and exactly what happened, I I cannot tell. Did they have a loss in?
Yes, this is
sorry,
the first
again,
week.
in weeks.
This is the first week, week 41, that Mr. Castleton phones in and said I suffered a loss, an unexplained loss.
Yes, I was unaware of this.
Did you look at these data?
I thought that in the run-up to the 2006 trial, I looked in great detail at all the data from January and February, but I don't recall seeing this particular issue. Whether I looked at it and could explain it, I now don't know. As I'm saying, obviously, there's something slightly odd about this particular data set in that it is an extract and it does seem to be in a slightly odd order.
Just go back to the previous page, please. Sorry, the top of this page. Thank you. Are these data produced by Fujitsu? Can you tell from the character strings set up?
Yes, this is data that originally was produced by Fujitsu, and you can see that you've got the sort order there, so it should be attribute, date and time is what it should be sorted on. Now, just looking at it, you can see it is no longer sorted on date and time. So I'm wondering, and also, as I said, it's not a complete set of event data in that there would have been many other things. You've not got anybody logging on and off, for example, in that. So this is what was provided by Fujitsu would have been a much bigger Excel spreadsheet, and this is a subset. Not
Sorry,
a
somebody
complete
coughed there. I
set.
couldn't hear that. This was.
This is this appears to be a subset of that data, and that subsetting would have been done by somebody other than Fujitsu. And it's also been sorted into an order which is not the order that it would have been provided by Fujitsu.
Do you recognise the format of the presentation of these data?
Oh yes, it's in the format that you would expect, and those lines at the top are what you would expect to see at the top of the ARQ event data. But the content is not. I mean, we've got the full set of events for this period somewhere in the evidence set, and we could go and look at that and see what was actually presented by Fujitsu.
That might be homework overnight.
I think it might be.
But on the face of it at the moment, these data do not make sense to you, in that the value of stamps has been reduced dramatically on the ARQ data, but not in the cash account for week 41.
Yes.
Can we look, please, at poll 00112440? And look at page 52, please. This is the first page of a peek in relation to an entirely separate branch. You can see the FAD code there under the summary.
Yeah.
It's not at Mr. Castleton's branch.
Yeah.
Can we read, please, the summary is discrepancy with cash account for the last few weeks. Can we read, please, the first few entries under the narrative? Call details have been taken from Andrew Wise at the MBSC on telephone number stated above. Postmaster has a discrepancy with his cash account for the last few weeks. So this is the 13th of January, so it's 4 days before 4 or 5 days. No, it's the day before Mr. Castleton makes his first report, yes?
Yep. Yes.
That was on the 14th of January.
Yes.
Postmaster has a discrepancy with his cash account for the last few weeks.
Yeah.
The MBSC have advised that the postmaster can only declare the holding amount or 0, not a negative figure. And then reading on, the MBSC have been through the checks with the postmaster and feel there is a software error, as the postmaster has negative figures, which he would not have been able to enter.
Yes.
In week 37, the postmaster was showing a surplus of £19.66 on the front page of the cash account. In table 5, cash and stock, he's showing a surplus cash figure of £42,860.61 and a surplus cheque figure of £116,248.50.
Yes.
The cash on hand was declared at £159,109.11. In week 38, the postmaster had a surplus of £49.22 on the front page of the cash account.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
And then if we carry on reading, please. Just scroll down. If you read to yourself, so I don't have to read the figures out, what's recorded in the second box from the bottom there.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the page, please. Read the top box, please.
Yes.
And then scroll down, please. We see at 16:01 on the 13th of January, this call is assigned to you.
Yes.
What did ESC mean?
Sorry?
It says assigning call to Anne Chambers in ESC. Is that the SSC?
SSC or EDSC, which we were sometimes known as. I don't know why.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not a different capacity you were being assigned this call in. You speak to the postmaster the next day. Can we see that entry at the bottom?
Yes.
Spoke to postmaster to get some more info. Before he balances, he rems out his checks, although sometimes one or two more checks are taken before he balances the stock unit. He declares cash, then declares stamps, then finally declares stock. On the first declare stock line, he includes any rest home checks, which he's holding. Can you help us with what the rest home checks mean?
I had no idea when I picked up this call, but it was some sort of a cheque that he received that I think then pensions for everybody in the rest home got.
So, like a care home?
Against. Yeah.
Okay, that's not a technical description. It's a reference to something like a care home.
That was how the postmaster described it to me.
This results in a discrepancy between the system check figure and the declared figure.
Yeah.
Something's changed in the counter code recently, which causes the discrepancy to be recorded wrongly. So the check discrepancy, instead of being cleared, is doubled,
Yes.
and the cash is wrongly adjusted.
Yeah.
However, I think the postmaster should not be declaring his rest home checks in this way, even if he's always done so. Need to get advice on this, or preferably get MBSC to explain what the proper procedure is.
Yeah.
So was this a postmaster reporting, declaring these care home checks in a slightly unusual way, but he'd been doing it for years? Yes?
Yes, he was doing something odd, but it had never shown up as a problem on the system, but because something had changed, and suddenly he started getting these very big numbers in both cash and cheques showing in table 5 of the cash account.
And something had changed in January to start causing these problems with essentially doubling up, hadn't it?
It wasn't quite doubling up, but it was the way that if you rolled over with having declared that you held a cheque, then it was treated with the wrong sign and then impacted the cash as well.
We see later in the peak, I'm not going to go to the detail, that the problem had been caused by a Horizon fix that had been released in November 2003. Do you remember?
Yeah.
What was the Horizon fix that had been released in 2003, November?
I cannot remember, but No, I'm sorry, I can't
Okay.
remember.
But it was the release of this fix by Fujitsu that had caused what had previously not been a problem to become a problem for this postmaster
Yes,
and to cause discrepancies.
yes,
And so it was the release of new software, the fix, that was causing the problem.
yes.
Do you remember that this peak was signed off, saying that the problem was the sub-postmaster not using the correct or standard procedure?
I don't recall that that was my conclusion on the peak.
Can we scroll down then, please? I think we can see a continuation of your entry at the top of the page there. Yes,
Yes,
on the 15th of January.
yes.
And then if we carry on scrolling down, please.
But at that point, I spoke to the PM and explained it was a software problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Later on the 15th, you email Julie Welsh, who will pass it on to the post office, and you ask the EPOS development to have a look at it.
Yeah,
Why were you asking the development team responsible for EPOS to have a look at this?
because EPOS that was the counter software, and it was a bug in their software.
So it was could I describe it this way, a software bug in EPOS that
Yeah.
was the root cause?
Yeah,
And you describe it as a nasty problem?
yes, it was nasty in that every week things got worse and worse and worse for a branch that was encountering this problem.
And then scroll down, please. Some more process entries on the rest of that page. And then at the foot of the page, fix for 97081 was to blame. That's the November 03 fix, yes?
Sorry, that was the...
That was the November 2003
Yeah.
fix that was to blame.
Yeah,
Initialization of the session effect variable with, and then some code, was not initialized. Alas, this will affect products such as
Yeah.
check. Yes?
yes,
And then scroll down, please. Some more process entries, yes?
yes,
And forward to the 19th, scroll down, please. You speak to the postmaster on the 19th, is that you?
no.
Somebody else, is it?
The call has been closed for some reason and then reopened, and so everything that was on it before appears again.
Okay. Oh, I see, yes. If we scroll down, please. And again. And again. And again. And again. And again. Just stop there. You see at the top of the page, an entry is made, Phil needed this information for a disciplinary with the postmaster tomorrow. Advise Phil that this is basically user error. And third line had advised the postmaster of correct procedures.
Yes, that's not an update that I put on there. You can see just that's something that's been sent across from PowerHelp. You can see HSH1 is a Power Help user. So somebody on the help desk has looked at what I'd put previously and has interpreted it, saying it was basically user error, which was not my conclusion.
Well, it wasn't correct in your view, was it?
That's not correct, no.
It was a bug.
Yes, it was a bug.
And you hadn't advised third line of the correct procedure?
I was third line.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, you, third line, had not advised the postmaster of the correct procedure.
I had spoken to the postmaster and I believe to an auditor who was in the branch when I phoned and explained that I thought this was something odd that they were doing, but I had also said that it was a software error.
The further fix to deal with the bug that had been introduced by the November 2003 fix was to be part of the S60 release. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Which didn't proceed until July 2004. Do you remember that?
I can't remember the date.
Okay, I'll give a cross-reference to that. There's no need to search for it. It's FUJ0015
Okay.
5590 at page 4, with S60 being authorised to proceed in July 2004.
Okay.
When you came to Mr. Castleton's case, did you think that there was any coincidence of timing or issues here, given that Mr. Castleton complained of difficulties with checks?
I looked at Mr. Castleton's cheque handling and he certainly was not declaring cheques in the same way that this branch had been doing. He didn't use declare stock, he used adjust stock, and it was very obvious for this particular instance, which was the only one I ever saw with this particular problem, because on your balance account, the balance report, or indeed in the cash account, it gave extremely large numbers, increasing week by week for both cash and cheques, in the method of payment section on the balance report and in table 5 on the cash account report, and they were not present for Mr. Castleton's branch.
Did you speak with anyone at Marine Drive to discuss their check practices?
No, I didn't, because they'd already talked to the MBSC and to the help desk about that, and the only problem that I could see with their checks was the one day where they hadn't cut off the report, which wasn't an uncommon problem. There were so many things they had to do. It's not surprising that branches very occasionally fail to do one of the things that they were supposed to.
What would you have thought if you had spoken to the branch and they told you that cheques often seem to clear to cash?
I'd have got them to give me some examples. So you're saying that when they received a cheque in payment, then it showed up on the system as cash instead?
Yes, and that they got to the stage where this had happened more than once, and that Mr. Castleton and the clerk would watch the other do it, so that they had two pairs of eyes watching what was happening when they had a cheque transaction to complete.
So they were certain that they were pressing the check button, but
Correct.
It was actually being treated as cash.
Yes.
I would have advised them to get the screen calibration checked.
And why would the screen calibration have raised its head with you?
Because if the buttons on the screen, if they were using the buttons on the screen, were... If the calibration was slightly out, you could press one button and it would have a slightly different effect. It shouldn't have been that far out, and that, in fact, could have given all sorts of problems, but that was part of the standard help desk stuff, I think, so that if they said, but we're pressing this button and something else happens, then you recalibrate the screen.
And you wouldn't have been able to tell any of that from just looking at the Horizon data?
No, to me, if it's settled to cache, I would assume that they had either pressed the fast cache button or the cache button. I believe there were two different ones.
Was that a problem sometimes, calibration of the screen, so that where you pressed a tile on, I'm calling it a tile, that might not be the correct expression, you know what I mean, an icon on the screen, because of a miscalibration, the function performed was not what was intended?
That could be a problem, but it would be pretty consistent. So for everything you did, it would be out. And though I would have thought, although I never worked in a branch, that it would be fairly obvious fairly quickly to the user if that were happening.
But checks clearing to cache may have fed into what you saw when you examined the data, that there were large discrepancies between daily cache declarations and what the system expected the cache to be.
No, because at the end of each day, when they had to go through their physical checks, they'd print off the check report, which would show the checks that had been recorded as for payments on the system. They then had to compare that with the physical checks that they were holding, and if there were any differences. So if they had a check and it wasn't on the list of checks, they could do an adjustment which would adjust between cash and check. So there would be no loss or gain as a result of doing that.
And what if they did that at the end of the day, where they could see that the check transactions hadn't cleared to checks, they'd cleared to cash? What would happen to the earlier misapplication of the check funds?
Nothing would happen to that. So you'd have your earlier transaction, which would be, say, a bill payment settled to cash. So you'd have those lines would remain unchanged, because once they're written, they stay there. And then further down at some point, you would see, I mean, there were various ways that the postmaster could do it, but one way would be doing a stock adjustment. So you'd see a line then with mode SAP, stock adjust positive. So your check going up by whatever the amount was, and the cash then would come down by the same amount.
Thank you very much.
There are examples of that in a very large spreadsheet, which is available to everybody.
Thank you. So I don't know whether that's a convenient moment for you. We've just reached before 4 p.m. and it's a convenient moment in the narrative.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Beer. So we'll resume again at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Mrs. Chambers, I got the impression that you intended to do some homework, as it was described, in respect of one line of questioning this evening. Would you need to speak to anyone about that, or is that you just looking at the document, so to speak?
That's me attempting to look at documents on my iPad, which may not be very easy.
Oh, okay. Well, I only ask because you would appreciate that unless I give you permission to do so, you shouldn't speak to anyone about your evidence.
I won't speak
and I
to
take
anybody.
I take it you don't need my permission if you decide to do some homework.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we've set it for ourselves too, or I've set it for Mr. Blake.
So there will be competing homeworks this evening. Very
Yes.
good.
Thank you very much.
To hear the result of it.